Sage Wanderer here, and welcome to Coffee Talk. Oh, my resonating guitar resonated with me when I yelled. It caused it to sing along. Okay, today we're going to talk about the John Titor Timeline. Don't. Yes, we're talking about Titor again. Why are we talking about Titor again on Coffee Talk? Well, reason number one is, it appears to me that where we stand right now, which is 2 days post-election in the 2020 election between Biden and Trump, and we still don't know who the president is, and there's accusations of fraudulent voter practices. There's accusations flying from both sides. Both sides at this point, I think, are claiming some victory here, and I've seen enough in the news to be fairly convinced that there is something funky going on, and that this election, well, let's just say, it ain't normal. This ain't the way it's supposed to go down, and it's things are happening now that have never happened before in the history of this country when it comes to an election, as far as I know. How does this tie into Titor? Just a reminder for those of you who may not have seen our previous John Titor discussions. The summary is this. An individual calling into late-night talk radio in the 1980s claimed to be a time traveler from our future. And he told us some things that he thought would come to pass. And it appears to me that some of the things he said we've already lived through, we're seeing the beginning of. And it does relate to what's going on with this election right now, I believe. So one of the things that jumps out at me is that Titor, when asked about how the Civil War, of course, if you know the story, you know John Titor claimed that he came from a post-Second Civil War America. And so he said that in his past, which would be our future then and potentially our present, that there was an election. And in the election, there was accusations of voter fraud. There was accusations of hacked voter machines. And that there seemed to be a fix-in, and that a man got elected president. Now, Titor didn't name the person, and it was interesting that he did say, as I recall, it was a man, president, got elected, okay, after a controversial election, after a bunch of lawsuits flying back and forth. When the smoke cleared, we had a new president. This is from the Titor Timeline. We had a new president. And everybody just kind of looked around at each other and went, "Did you vote for him? I didn't vote for him. Did you vote for him?" And people just started saying, "Who voted for him?" And we almost did like a internet roll call on who voted for who. And we come to find out nobody really voted for this guy. In the Titor Timeline, this illegitimate president that arose through some fraudulent means was no one was at his rallies before the election. There was not a lot of excitement for his campaign. He seemed to be selected, and pushed up there without a whole lot of grassroots support. This is from the John Titor Timeline. I'm not talking about the news today. I'm not talking about what's going on today. I'm talking about what a guy who claimed to be a time traveler said on late night radio and on the early days of the internet in the 80s and again in the 90s. I think he made a couple of appearances, or someone claiming to be Titor. So, does this mean time travel is real? Dun. Man, I don't have enough coffee to swallow that one. There's just too many quantum mechanical paradoxes to overcome to be able to swallow the idea of time travel. So if Titor got it right, what are the alternatives? Well, he could have just been really creative. A really creative, tuned-in guy who looked into the future, and he guessed perfectly what was going to happen. And he saw into our future perfectly, a divide that in the 80s and 90s didn't really exist. Because at the core of John Titor's story is the battle between the country folk and the city folk. That was the main division in his Civil War story. is that the city folk were trying to control the country folk, and they came for the guns. And the city folk fought back and withheld the food. And then the city folk sent out to the country folk an army to take the food. And we fought over the food. And this is all supposedly going to happen in our near future if Titor was right. Okay? And at the time, in the 80s and 90s, there really wasn't that kind of division. I mean, the division that we have now where you felt unsafe going to the city, it was only small when I was young. Now there's country people that they don't even want to go to Oklahoma City. Now, people told me, if you go to Oklahoma City, carry a gun. I'm like, look, man, I've gigged in Dallas and Denver and Portland and, Sacramento and, all of Northern California. And I've been everywhere, man. I've been in the worst neighborhoods in Dallas and Denver, and Oklahoma City ain't squat, as far as danger as far as I'm concerned. But the people here, they don't even want to go there anymore because it's becoming more and more toxic. The disagreement and the misunderstanding and the misalignment between those who live in the city connected to the government all the time and those who live in the country that never see a cop unless something bad happens and they have to call them, which never happens. Usually you call the ambulance and the sheriff shows up to see what's going on, peaceful place here versus the city where it's a never-ending round of siren after siren interrupting your sleep in the wee hours of the morning until you learn to just tune out the chaos, right? And so this division that didn't exist so bad, I mean, it's the country mouse and the city mouse is an age-old story. But we had a solidarity as Americans where, New York Yankees and Dallas Cowboys got together and partied over America on the 4th of July, right? It's that's gone. Those days are gone, and an animosity has replaced it. That didn't exist when Titor was telling his story on the radio all those years ago. So once again, swallow some coffee. Was John Titor a time traveler? Oh. I know that looked funny on the video because it's kind of, the computer captures not as accurately as my phone. But, so it's funny looking. But anyway, that'll probably be the thumbnail. Well, let me offer you this, Batman. What if, I should turn my guitar around because every time I raise my voice, it sings along. I can hear it right there. What if John Titor was not a time traveler? Let's say John Titor was not a creative novel writer who just looked into the future and made this up. What if John Titor was actually a whistleblower? Dum, dum, dum. That's the name of the video. John Titor, whistleblower or time traveler? Because he got it right. Right? And I don't think anybody could have imagined this dystopian future we live in so accurately that he nailed it. It's kind of good for people like me, and I won't lie that his story and the way we've lined up with it is one of the reasons I live in Podunk, Oklahoma, in the middle of nowhere, down about 5 to 15 miles of dirt road, depending on which way you go from the nearest blacktop. The place where if you come down here and you don't have business down here, and you start any trouble down here, you're going to spend eternity down here. Know what I mean? I got to dig it. And, no pun intended. I do know the guy with the backhoe. Part of the reason I moved here is because the cities are going to become dangerous. The suburbs are going to become war zones if you listen to the Titor timeline. And those living in highly populated areas near urban centers, especially in battleground states, right, or in leftist-held blue states, you're going to see great oppression against Trump supporters, I think. If we're on the Titor timeline and now is then, and these are the people I think they are, and we're living this reality, potentially. Let's go back to him being a whistleblower. So what we're seeing, what it looks like to me, 2020 looks like a planned out, chaotic attack against the American way of life. Okay? 2020 looks like, to me, what if you know the channel, my friend's Folly told me about down in Weatherford, Texas, many years ago, when she told me what was going to happen based on what their plan was. That this equals 2020 is the event or series of events that were engineered to create chaos that would make the average American throw his hands up to whoever wanted to be in charge just so the chaos would stop. So maybe Titor was an insider who knew their plan. Maybe Titor was even on their side and tried to tell them, hey, look, if you try to do this to the American people, the country people will rebel. And maybe they don't believe that, and they're not, or they don't care, or they think we'll be easily squashed, and they are arrogant and they don't understand our potential. And maybe Titor did. And what Titor has is a combination of their plan of what they intend to do to us, Trump supporters, country folks, Christian folks, gun-owning straight white men, what they intend to do to us and our families, combined with Titor's interpretation, because he knew that country boys can't survive, and so he combined what he knew they were going to try to do with what he knew we might do back in return to create an accurate picture of the future 20 years potentially or more before it occurred, as much as 30 years, 40 years before it occurred in some of these instances, and just depending on how you do the math. So there it is. If Titor was an insider, then he's given us a map of what they intend to do to us, which is take the guns, take over the country areas, procure the farmlands, take the food, and whether we fight them or not, Titor seemed to think the country folks would fight. Coming at you from here in the country, surrounded by cows, where the cows and the dogs outnumber the people 10 to 1 or 100 to 1, depending on which part of the county you live in. I think we'll fight. I think Titor's probably right in the response that we would have. And then, of course, if you follow the Titor Timeline story, after some years of struggle, and with Chinese intervention into the United States on behalf of the city folk, that the Russians feel cornered. They understand that if America falls, they're next. And so they make a decision to neutralize the United States' ability to fight. And they understand that it's not the people of America that Russia has a problem with. It's the globalist government and the high-tech tyranny of the cities, and the way that they handle the national government, the fact that the cities control the national government. So his beef wasn't with the people. So in the John Titor timeline, the Russians nuke several American cities with the kind of new nuclear weapon that at the time that Titor was talking about this wasn't invented yet, or if it was highly top secret. Because at the time of the Titor timeline beginning, where this guy starts talking back in the 80s and then again on the internet in the 90s, that these low fallout, high yield nuclear weapons in small compact packages that can be set off in urban areas, destroying cities without destroying the ability for the people to live off the land in the surrounding areas. That wasn't invented yet. They only had the kind of dirty nukes that just destroyed everything and made everybody sick, and all the animals and the plants and everything were defiled for centuries. Chernobyl level of infectious disaster, of radioactive waste. But now they have both sides, all sides have these low fallout nuclear weapons where the dust cloud doesn't go up in the air full of nuclear particles, and the cloud of nuclear death doesn't happen. Just the melting destruction. And so this is what Titor was saying was going to happen before this technology was made public, or maybe even before it was even invented. Titor said that Russians would use this kind of weapon to just destroy the cities, and that the countryside would go on without batting an eye, essentially, and that the Civil War would be over, and that people would live a relatively peaceful and country existence. He said that live music would come back and that many people would learn to play instruments to pass the time. Network television and cable broadcast television and the networks, all that kind of entertainment and movies and all of that will be gone in the future. There will be no Hollywood, according to Titor's predictions or his time traveling stories. The future will be a lot like the 1800s, but with surviving technology. So there still will be an internet. There still will be cell phone service. There still will be information available on a worldwide scale, right? But the cities are gone. So, it's just a matter of whether you can get your network running in your community. And most of the communities in this post-Civil War had internet access. And so the new stars of the future, according to Titor, were guys like me. Guys who were on the internet telling their stories, guys who were on the internet making music, guys and gals, as it were, people presenting their own private plays, writing their own stories, and producing their own television shows on the internet. Titor basically described YouTube or a YouTube-like device, 20 years before it was ever invented. I think as time goes on, this John Titor thing is going to become increasingly interesting to me. And I only wish that he had told us more. The information is, there are some specifics which I've raised with you, but for the most part, it's a lot of vagueness. But I wish I could sit down with him and talk to Titor again, because it does look like we are living on the John Titor timeline, and it don't take a whole lot of coffee to swallow that. Tell me, what do you think? Was John Titor a time traveler? Was he a creative person who just saw the tea leaves, looked into the future? Was he a psychic? We didn't even bring that up. Maybe he had psychic visions, and that was his way of presenting them. So maybe he was just a psychic. Don't. Future video, John Titor, a psychic? Or was he a whistleblower? Was he a whistleblower? Did he come into this thing with the intention of warning us what they were planning and presenting us with a pretty well thought out way of defending ourselves against this invasion from the city? And if you know who wins you know what, and we end up with a blue person down there in our White House, then we are in trouble, us country folk. Us country mice better start digging some foxholes. And maybe that's why God sent me Radar, my bullhound, because I swear he must be part foxhound, because he loves digging a foxhole. I could just put him on a spot and go, hey, dig me a foxhole. I can come back in a little bit, clean it up, put some sandbags around it. We're good to go. I got my own foxhole digging dog. So we're going to have to dig in, stand our ground. One of the reasons I'm in Oklahoma is because we have constitutional amendments in place that prevent the federal government from confiscating these kinds of rifles that they want to confiscate. So, it is going to be Oklahoma and Texas potentially against the world to keep our guns. And I don't know. Interesting times. I hope that Trump pulls it out, right? And that Titor was wrong, but it's starting to look like this election was foretold by this time traveler. Tell me what you think in the comments section. And God save our republic. Until next time on Coffee Talk!